with me to the book of Genesis chapter 1. Genesis chapter 1. That's the first book in the Bible. Genesis chapter 1. Let's read from verse 27. Genesis, the first chapter, the 27th verse, reads as follows. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. Turn with me to Psalm 127. Psalm number 127. The book of Psalms, but Psalm number 127. We'll read verse 1. Except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. Except the Lord keep the city, the watchman waketh but in vain. And then let's look at John chapter 4. John chapter 4, verses 23 and 24. John chapter 24 and verse 23. But the hour cometh, and now is, when the true worshipers shall worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For the Father seeketh such to worship him. God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. For a few minutes I want to talk on this subject, worthy worship. Worthy worship. Worthy worship. I mentioned earlier that I challenge our brothers to present from the subject of worship, and from that presentation I thought that we should share again today from that same subject. Real worship, I contend, like Seegler, real worship is communing with God. Real worship is communing with God. More specifically, real worship is communicating with God. As I said to them earlier, real worship is not just me talking to God, but more importantly, God talking to me. Real worship, really to worship God, one must get past the symbols of worship and look at the realities of worship. The realities that the symbols typify is more important than the symbols themselves. That you have folk who are familiar with the symbol, but they're really not familiar with the Lord. Mike gave a good illustration. We talked about the Lord's Supper and worship is that he says, he that eateth and drinketh unworthily, eateth and drinketh damnation to their own soul. That was good. That's kind of what we're talking about. Don't confuse going through the motions as being a substitute for the real thing. He said, yeah, you come together and you can have the table. You can have the right food on the table. You can even eat the food that's on the table. But if you're not discerning the body of Christ, you're messing up. Not only are you not doing what Christ told you to do, you're actually doing hurt to yourself. That's why some folks think they're doing a child of faith, when you give a child the communion that's left over, some folk I see them trying to sneak their baby's communion. Well, I don't want to bring damnation to my child. Y'all better hear me today. Come on. See, you have no business participating in the supper if you don't know the Christ that the supper is about. Well, you need to understand there's no sense in you trying to participate in worship if you are not familiar with the God you're supposed to be worshiping. Worship ain't about sin. And see, I see folks, and we got all kinds of excuses, when, people worship God differently. Everybody don't worship the same way. I understand that we have a different makeup. I understand all that. But the bottom line is, whether or not you are worshiping God. You can't tell me you worshiping God and you singing in the choir and you're all happy while you singing. And then when I start preaching, you get sleepy. You can't say you worshiping God and you are preaching. You want everybody to say amen for you, but you're gonna take a nap when I'm trying to preach. Y'all better hear me today. You can't claim you worshiping God and you just got everything in your head, in your mind. Your mind is going everywhere except focusing on the Lord. Or you can talk all the talk you want. I don't care how educated you are. I don't care how much training you have. It's all about, can you focus on God when you're in God's house on the Lord's day? Worship is not about the preacher. Worship is not about the choir. Worship is about God. And they that worship Him must worship Him in spirit. Oh, help me somebody. And in truth. So let me start talking. Then I want to, just for our discussion, look at the image and the intimacy. The image and the intimacy. The image and the intimacy. I focused on Genesis 1 when he says, God created man in his own. Come on here, somebody. Yeah. God created. To me, that's key to worship. I got to understand that. If I don't understand that, I don't understand worship. God created man uniquely because He creates man in His own image. See, that's why y'all you animal lovers, you dog lovers, and I don't have no problem with that. But see, I got a problem when you start trying to put an animal on a human level. The Lord created everything. He created cows and dogs and pigs and all that. He created all of that before He got to man. Y'all better hear me today. And the Bible says when He got to man, He shaped man first. But he created him in His own image. He breathed into man. He didn't breathe into a dog. He didn't breathe into a cow. He breathed into man the breath of life. Come on here, somebody. And I know some dogs got more sense than some people, but a dog don't have a soul. He's not made in the image of God. You can bring a dog to church. Blind people who can have seeing eye dogs, they can bring a dog to church, but you can't have a dog that can worship. I've seen a seeing eye dog who can see, but I never saw a seeing eye dog that can worship. Come on. Now, I know some seeing eye dogs worship as good as some of y'all do, but I'm talking about a real worship is more than just being in the place. God don't have eyes like we do. God don't have a head like we do. I keep telling you, because if God had a head, He missed something. He'd have to look behind and He don't have nothing back there. He don't have hands like we do, because if He had hands like mine, my arms aren't long enough to reach some place. God doesn't have the kind of body we have. The only time there's a connection between a body and God was when Jesus took on our body. Y'all better hear me today. No, what makes God God? God is a spirit. You missed it. But what you don't understand, the same God who is spirit, He made us spirit. See, y'all so in love body sitting here, you can walk around in your house. Your body can be here, and you can be walking around on the parking lot after church. Your body can be sitting up here looking at me, but your mind are miles away. Some of y'all on vacation before you go on vacation. Some of y'all trying to think about what you're going to do after church. Some of y'all already standing in line at the restaurant, and you haven't even left church yet. You in church, but your mind is not in church. I'm made in the image of God. My spirit is like God, but you got to mind yourself. He said, when you worship me, don't try to con me. Don't try to fake me. When you worship me, you got to do more than just show up. When you worship me, you got to do more than just go through the motion. When you worship me, you ain't fooling nobody. When you worship me, you got to give me your attention. You got to give me your reverence. You got to give me your all. Don't come here talking about I'm number one and you put everything else ahead of me. If you worship me, you got to give me my rightful place. God is a spirit. And we've got to worship him in spirit and in truth. We got to give him all of our attention. All of our, and so you got to focus to worship. You got to work to worship. See, the devil don't want you to worship. Worship is like prayer. I tell you, the one thing the devil doesn't want you to do is pray. Because he knows you can't pray and sin at the same time. And you understand, you can't worship God and sin at the same time. If you're looking at some woman lusting, you ain't worshiping God. I'm going to hear somebody. When my deacons, he gone to glory now. I hope he ain't glory. Oh, Jack Green. Jack Green with the Bahamas. Jack Green with the Bahamas, but he said, Rev, I didn't want to just be around when they went to those tourist spots. So he caught a taxi. He said, the first day, he said, Mercedes, they got taxi Mercedes over there. You can ride Mercedes all day long. He caught him a taxi, Mercedes, and took him and said, I want you to take me to the inner city. He went where the real folk live. They wasn't dressed up like we are. They wasn't looking all fine. He's in the Bahamas, but he said, hey, all that stuff you see on TV. He went to church. And when he got to church, he says, man, he said, the first thing, just looking, man, it's so different. When church started, you could look all for miles around. People, they not walking, they were running to church. They were running to church. I saw something like that when I went to a national meeting one time. It was a World Day of Prayer. And then all these people from Africa, they called them, that bunch of sticks up, and all the folks in the whole auditorium just start running down. They're not satisfied just to walk to church. They're so excited about worshiping God, they run. But what tripped him out, he said, when I got there, Reverend, those ladies were sitting in there with their breasts out and grass skirts on. And he said, Reverend, I'm looking around there, you know, and he's a man like anybody else. He's looking at all them breasts just shaking up and down. And you know, his mind is on anything else other than worship. But he said, I look at the other men. And those men, they not worried about no breasts. They wasn't looking at all that. Preacher wasn't worried about none of that. They were used to that. They didn't come there to look at the women. Y'all better hear me today. They wasn't worried about what folks can stay there, but I don't. I see the image and the intimacy. I see the instruction and the ingestion. What do you take home? That's my question. Reverend White says you ought not come to church worry about what you take. I agree with that to some degree, because some folk come to church to take away the wrong stuff. Yeah. You don't come to church to take away what color the robes were, or what uniform the ushers wore. You don't come to church to take away what folk were wearing, who had on a tie, who didn't.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
You come to church to worship.
Yes.
But I contend, I told you, if you're worshiping, you're communing with God.
Yes.
And I told you so many times, when God talks to you, he don't just compliment you. Whenever God speaks to you, he always has a challenge, a job. He gives you something to do. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw also the Lord. He was high and lifted up, and his veil filled the temple. Isaiah said, I saw it. He said, but you know what? When I saw him, I noticed something else. Whenever you see God, you can also see your filthiness. Because when cleanness stands to filthiness show up. Sometimes folk who think they clean, they end up dirty. Because you're standing next to God, and God has a way of showing you all you that thou folk. You folk that think you all that. Well, you might be all that, but when you stand next to God, you don't see the all that. God shows you your standing, your dinginess. When he says the same God that showed me that said the angel took a hot coal and fixed my lip. I had unclean lips. I'm a man of unclean lips. He said, but the angel took and purged my lip and cleaned my lips. But God doesn't clean you up so you can brag. When God cleans you up, he cleans you up for a purpose. And the question comes, and the question always comes, who shall I send? God is not asking the question because he don't know. God is not asking the question because he needs somebody to inform him. God always challenges you. In other words, God never forces anybody to work. You got to volunteer. Y'all better hear me today. Who should I send and who will go for us? And Isaiah said, here am I. Come on here, somebody. My question is, what do you take home? When you at church, you ought to have something in your bag. I gave the illustration when I go to McDonald's. I go to McDonald's. I don't care. All you high sedated folk like y'all can't eat a Happy Meal. I go to McDonald's. Kiss my foot, you sophisticated stuff. You got to pay a bunch of money. I enjoy a Happy Meal and I'm happy. When I go to McDonald's and I get my bag, Brother Evans, when I get my bag, I don't know the little boy speaking. I don't know who that is. I don't know their name. I don't know if it's a boy or girl sometimes. When I pull up and give them my money, I still don't know who that is. When I pull up, they give me a bag. I don't know the cook's name. I don't know the person handing me the bag. I really don't care. I didn't come there to meet folk. I didn't come there to socialize. I came there to take home. Come on here, somebody. I ain't happy if I don't have my happy meal. There ain't nothing worse than getting home and looking in your bag. Come on here, somebody. And find out you ain't got in there. Oh, y'all better hear me today. And we got too many folk who go home and don't have a happy meal. We got too many folk go home empty. You go to church, but you leave the same way you came. You go to church and go through all the motions, but you don't hear anything. Oh, you heard the preacher preach. What did he preach? I don't know. Why? So they sang that song, touched me. What was the lyrics in the song? I don't know. You attending service, but you aren't taking anything home with you. The old folks say you ought to come to church as an empty pitcher before a full fountain. Come on here, somebody. I'm saying you ought to bring something to church to church. You see, I found out in order to receive something when you get here, you got to pull some mess out before you get here. I never go to the filling station to fill my tank when it's on full.
Yeah.
And the gas shortage, folk would be topping off. All you're doing is wasting your money. So they found out when you call yourself topping off, all you're doing is giving the company some money.
Yeah.
Because a little gas comes through, but more of it when you, as soon as you that pump click, a lot of gas in that line, it goes all the way back. Y'all don't hear me. And you got a lot of folk who think they topping off, but you full of the wrong stuff. You got to run some stuff out before you can get some stuff in. You got to use what God gave you before God gonna give